Police found 3 bodies in a small one-story house on the outskirts of Fort Wayne. Blood was on the walls, the floor, and the blankets. A brother and sister with Down syndrome lay scattered among children's belongings, alongside the body of their grandmother. Traces of menstrual blood and semen were found on the floor. Investigators had never encountered such a scene. It looked like a brutal massacre, but the true motives behind the crime were revealed only after the autopsy. The Walker family lived on the outskirts of Fort Wayne, Indiana, in an old wooden house with a sagging fence. After their parents died, the brother and sister were left under the care of their grandmother Mary, an elderly woman with a stern gaze and harsh habits. The girl Jenny was 2 years older than her brother. Both suffered from Down syndrome, which manifested itself in delayed development, distinctive facial features, and a certain naivete. They were often teased at school, so they spent most of their time at home, in the yard, or in a small room on the 2nd floor. Grandma spent the early morning chores, packing, washing floors, and preparing simple meals from inexpensive ingredients. Her primary concern was ensuring the children were clean, safe, and tidy. The house always smelled faintly of detergents and medications, and in the evenings, when the silence thickened outside, the whole family would gather around the large wooden table for dinner. Mary's control was absolute. All the cabinets were locked. She closely monitored the children's movements, and any deviation from the schedule was considered a violation. However, from the outside, the family's life seemed quiet. No one heard arguments, no guests were seen, and only occasionally did a social worker appear on the property. Neighbors knew the Walkers had special children, but no one knew the details. City officials considered Mary a responsible guardian, and the house aroused no suspicion. The only thing neighbors noted was that the children rarely left the gate, and their grandmother rarely spoke to anyone on the street. And so the years passed, monotonous, quiet, uneventful. The family's life seemed isolated, closed off from the world. Behind the thick curtains, among the neatly arranged things, a tension gradually grew, unnoticeable to outsiders. As they approached adolescence, despite their differences, a special, close bond began to form between Jenny and Thomas. In a home where every day was like the last, and any expression of independence was harshly suppressed by their grandmother, the brother and sister sought solace in each other. Jenny was more determined and active as a child. She was the first to learn to write simple notes, leaving Thomas small messages on scraps of paper. They included hearts and simple phrases like, "You're my best friend. I feel good when I'm with you." Thomas collected these pieces of paper in a shoebox, which he hid under his bed. He treasured each note, often rereading them in the evening before bed when his grandmother turned off the light in their shared room. Gradually, their affection began to extend beyond simple friendship. They would sit together for hours in a corner of the yard, sharing secrets, holding hands, and sometimes hugging longer than brother and sister. There were no other friends in their world. They could find support and understanding only in each other. Any sign of concern was especially poignant. From time to time, Jenny wrote Thomas long messages, sharing her thoughts, dreams, and fears. She tried to explain in naive and simple words what she couldn't say out loud. "I will always be there. You and I are special, and no one will understand us the way we understand each other." Thomas responded with short but sincere notes. "I love you. I want to be with you forever." In the evenings, when Grandma fell asleep, Jenny would get out of bed, quietly approach her brother, and sit next to him. Sometimes they would look at each other silently. Sometimes they would discuss what would happen if they were separated. Thomas often feared this and begged his sister not to leave him alone. She would hug him, stroke his head, and reassure him, promising to always be there. As their feelings developed, elements of intimacy emerged. Neither of them fully understood what was happening. They were still developing at the level of adolescence, but the sensations and desire for intimacy were very real. In the silence of the night, Jenny would sometimes kiss her brother on the lips, hold his hand longer, and stroke his shoulder. One day, she brought him a small gift, a handmade bracelet made of beads and thread. Thomas put it on and never took it off, even at night. They created their own games in which they allowed themselves to do things their grandmother forbade. They hid in the pantry and held secret meetings behind the barn, where they could talk to each other without fear of being overheard. Intimate moments became part of their secret life. They didn't realize how much this went beyond the bounds of normal sibling relationships. Every few weeks, when Grandma went into town for groceries, Jenny and Thomas would have real festivities. They'd take something delicious out of the refrigerator, sit on the kitchen floor, and eat it with their hands. At such moments, Jenny would whisper words of love to her brother, promising that they would always be together and that no one could separate them. Thomas, in turn, promised to always protect Jenny, even if he had to hide or run away from home. Their bond grew stronger, their feelings ever more intense. In the evenings, they exchanged notes containing not only confessions, but also words of support and promises to care for each other for the rest of their lives. There was no room for betrayal or deception in their relationship, only blind trust and complete interdependence. They were confident that together they could overcome any difficulties. To outsiders, all this would have been a shock, but for Jenny and Thomas, their small, isolated world seemed normal. Any expression of care and love for each other felt like salvation in a home where every step was controlled and the future seemed bleak and empty. During this period, their mutual obsession only intensified. Inside the old Walker house, every day was the same, but behind the identical rituals of life, unbeknownst to everyone, Jenny and Thomas were gradually growing closer. Their relationship became increasingly intimate and secret. They knew how to hide their feelings. Brief glances at dinner, light touches under the table, smiles that only they understood. Any step, any word outside the usual script was risky. At night, Jenny woke up more and more often and quietly approached her brother's bed. Thomas was always waiting for her. In these moments, their connection was expressed in more than just words. They hugged, whispering simple phrases in each other's ears that symbolized closeness and support. Over time, these nightly encounters became longer. They found peace in each other's arms and felt safe. At first, Grandmother Mary suspected nothing. Over the years, she lost her former vigilance. Her health weakened, her eyesight deteriorated. She relied on the established order. Jenny and Thomas were always together, but they seemed to remain children, incapable of independent action. Sometimes she heard quiet whispers at night, but attributed them to her grandchildren's fear of the dark and loneliness. With the arrival of spring, Jenny began to linger in the bathroom, sitting on the floor for long periods, sorting through old photographs and writing new notes to her brother. In one, she wrote, "I want to be with you always, even if we are separated." Thomas replied, "You are my family, you are my home." Gradually, their closeness transcended the boundaries of ordinary childhood embraces. One night, when it was quiet outside and the rain pounded the roof, they allowed themselves to be with each other for the first time, as openly as their senses and understanding of the world allowed. That night changed everything. For Jenny and Thomas, their act wasn't forbidden. It was an expression of love, which for them had become the only meaning of existence. From that day on, their relationship became even more secretive and cautious. They understood that their grandmother might notice something unusual, but they couldn't give up their meetings. They exchanged intimate notes describing their feelings, sharing their fears, and promising to keep their secrets. Grandmother began to notice changes. Jenny and Thomas became withdrawn, often going up to the attic alone and rarely going out into the yard for walks. A peculiar detachment appeared on their faces, and a strange connection between them that hadn't been there before was felt. Mary recalled how they used to squabble over toys as children, but now they were inseparable and always stuck together. One morning, Mary entered the room earlier than usual. She saw Jenny and Thomas asleep in the same bed, huddled close together. Their faces were calm, and their hands were clasped together. This was the grandmother's first warning sign. She didn't show it, but throughout the day, she began to watch her grandchildren more closely. In the following days, Mary tried to restore order. She opened the door to their room more often, entered without knocking, and eavesdropped on their conversations. She noticed that the former naivety between them was gone. They looked at each other like adults, exchanging glances that were too full of meaning. Jenny became anxious and nervous when her grandmother was around. Thomas was quieter than usual, and his attempts to spend time with his sister became even more insistent. They locked themselves in the bathroom more and more often, coming up with new excuses to escape. One day, her grandmother found crumpled notes in the trash with hearts and confessions written in a childish handwriting. She began to suspect that there was more to their relationship than just childhood friendship. The turning point came one evening when Mary accidentally saw Jenny and Thomas kissing in the pantry, hiding from the adults. She hesitated to act. Shock, fear, and helplessness clashed within her. For a long time, she couldn't believe what was happening, but the facts became increasingly clear. Within a few days, tension in the house reached a fever pitch. Mary withdrew, avoided direct conversations with her grandchildren, and sought explanations in books and reference books. But she realized this wasn't a typical problem that could be solved by discipline or prohibitions. She felt she was losing control and could no longer protect her family from the danger she now saw in her own children. At that moment, for Jenny and Thomas, the world finally narrowed to one thing: their secret, profound connection. They stopped fearing exposure and no longer considered the consequences. Their love and obsession with each other became their only source of joy. But it was precisely this that caused the tragedy that was already inevitable. The Walker home became a cage filled with anxiety and mounting tension. Jenny and Thomas were completely immersed in their own closed world, where no rules or external judgment existed. Only one thing mattered to them now: being together no matter what. Every little detail, every glance at each other became the meaning of life, and any outside interference was perceived as a threat. Their meetings increasingly took place at night. Now they didn't even try to hide from each other. Jenny wrote Thomas new notes: "Only with you am I happy. No one can separate us." They kept them in a drawer under the bed, among other little secrets: ribbons, bracelets, candy wrappers they found around the house. Sometimes locked in the bathroom, Jenny would stroke her brother's hair, whisper words of love to him, kiss him on the lips, and hug him around the neck, as if for the last time. Thomas reciprocated with childish spontaneity, yet sincere and tender. In the evenings, when Grandma finally fell asleep, they would sneak into the pantry or the attic, where they would hold their secret meetings. There, among old things and boxes, they would create a small world for themselves: whispers, quiet promises, hugs. At some point, their affection grew into a true obsession. Jenny became jealous even of Thomas's grandmother, believing that only she had the right to care for her brother. Thomas, however, couldn't imagine himself outside this bond. His emotions were simple, yet incredibly powerful. He looked forward to every night, like a holiday, to being with Jenny. Physical intimacy became a normal part of their lives. They sat cuddled together, could spend hours in silence, hugging, and sometimes lay down on the same bed and fell asleep in each other's arms. With each passing moment, the fear of being discovered subsided, and the desire to be together only intensified. Secret intimacies became less a violation of rules than a way to survive in their limited world. The grandmother noticed more and more oddities: quiet conversations behind closed doors, a general lack of interest in the outside world, mood swings in both of them. She increasingly caught herself wondering if the children were hiding something serious. Sometimes approaching their room at night, she would hear muffled voices and crying, but she couldn't bring herself to intervene. Her own loneliness and fear of the future prevented her from taking drastic measures. One evening, after yet another argument over a discovered love note, Grandma decided to confront him. She sternly demanded an explanation. Jenny, defending her brother, was undaunted and, for the first time, openly stated that she loved Thomas and would not allow them to be separated. Mary perceived this as a betrayal, a complete failure of her efforts to raise and protect her grandchildren. Over the next few days, the relationship in the house became unbearable. Grandma locked doors, confiscated notes, interrogated them, and monitored her grandchildren's every move. Jenny and Thomas tried to escape her control. They exchanged secret notes, met secretly in the restroom, and held hands at every opportunity. Their feelings only grew stronger under the restrictions and pressure. The climax came suddenly. One evening, Mary accidentally caught Jenny and Thomas together in the attic. They were hugging, crying, and vowing their love for each other, despite threats of separation. Grandmother, unable to bear it any longer, pounced on them, shoving Jenny away and screaming that she would never allow them to be together. At that moment, everything in the house spiraled out of control. Panicked and desperate, unaware of the consequences, Mary grabbed a knife from the kitchen table and rushed toward her grandchildren. Events unfolded quickly. She stabbed first Jenny, then Thomas, leaving them no chance of escape. Screams echoed through the house. Then all was quiet. Finding herself alone amid blood and scattered belongings, the grandmother realized what she had done and, minutes later, fatally stabbed herself. When the police entered the house that morning, they found a quiet, tidy interior, a stark contrast to the horror of what had happened. 3 bodies lay side by side, with evidence of a struggle and blood on the walls and floor. Only one note, written by Jenny, remained on the table: "We will always be together." On the morning of March the 17th, 2004, neighbors noticed a silence in the Walker house. Usually at this time, Mary would go out into the yard, while Jenny and Thomas would gather by the window. When no one appeared, one of the neighbors called a social worker. A few hours later, police opened the door. Inside, everything appeared as usual, clean and tidy, but the air was thick with the smell of blood and something sour. In the living room, 3 bodies lay on the floor and the carpet. The brother and sister were hugging, their faces calm, and Thomas had a homemade bracelet around his neck. Nearby, closer to the exit, stood the grandmother, holding a knife. There were signs of a struggle all around: a broken cup, an overturned chair, notes scattered across the floor, among which one stood out in large letters: "I won't give you to anyone." Investigators began their work at the crime scene, carefully examining every corner. It was clear the crime had occurred at night. Judging by the condition of the bodies, it had occurred at least 6 hours earlier. A medical examination confirmed that Jenny and Thomas had died from stab wounds, and that Mary had fatally stabbed herself a short time later. No signs of a struggle or the presence of others were found. An examination of the house revealed that the teenager's room was filled with drawings, letters, and homemade jewelry. All the notes found pointed to an unusual but very close emotional bond between the brother and sister. Jenny's diary detailed their relationship, her fear of separation, and the constant feeling of danger from her grandmother. For the investigators, this became the main key to understanding the motives behind the tragedy. Neighbor interviews yielded little new information. Everyone considered Mary a strict but conscientious guardian. No one suspected a close relationship between the children. Social services confirmed that the home had undergone regular inspections, and the Walkers had no prior violations. The investigation concluded that the events were the result of an internal family crisis, years of isolation, and a lack of outside support. The criminal case only gained publicity due to the unusual drama unfolding behind the closed doors of an ordinary American home. The Walker family's story remained in police archives as an example of tragedy caused by isolation and the inability to cope with difficult family relationships.